Is the iPhone SE 2022 a good phone to buy in 2022? Well, in this video, we're gonna find out. What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're gonna be taking a look at the Apple iPhone SE 3 and going over whether or not this phone is actually worth buying compared to some of the other new phones in the same price range. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. But with that being said, let's get started. Now, with the iPhone SE 2022, we're getting a 4.7-inch Retina IPS LCD display with a resolution of 750 by 1334, a PPI of 326, an aspect ratio of 16 by 9, and a screen-to-body ratio of around 65.4%. So the first thing I will say about this display, it is really small, especially compared to the average modern smartphone. Pretty much every new smartphone, whether it's a really low-end phone or a really high-end phone, has a display somewhere in the ballpark of 6.5 inches. Now, there can be some a little bit smaller, like for example the iPhone 13 has a 6.1-inch display, and there are some much larger, like the Motorola Moto G stylus for example, that's 6.8 inches. But in general, besides the iPhone SE, there's pretty much no phone being made in 2022 that has a display this small. In addition to this, not only is the display itself pretty small, but the form factor is a little bit weird. With an aspect ratio of 16 by 9, we're getting a wider and shorter form factor than pretty much every other smartphone out there. So when you're doing stuff like viewing videos and photos in landscape mode, it's probably not going to be nearly as pleasant to look at. And when you're reading, you won't be able to fit as much on the screen without scrolling. Now, another interesting thing about this phone's display is the resolution, 750 by 1334. It's basically 720p, and for a phone in this price range, that is pretty low. I mean, the image doesn't really look bad per se, but at the same time, this phone starts at around $400, $426, something like that, and really just goes up from there. And pretty much every other phone in this price range is going to have at least a 1080p resolution. If you're looking at some of the older flagship Android phones, like the Samsung Galaxy S10 for example, you can even get a resolution of 1440p for much less than the price of this phone. Now again, it really doesn't look bad, but for what it is, I feel like you really can do better. So if you're going to be consuming a lot of content, whether you're viewing photos, playing games, streaming videos, that sort of thing, or just going on social media, really no matter what you're doing, if you are going to be on your phone a lot, definitely keep this in mind, because for me personally, I wouldn't really be that comfortable looking at this display for a long period of time. Now for storage, this phone is getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Keep in mind it does start out at 64 gigabytes, but I just got the 128 gigabyte variant just because I figured it's a $50 difference. For a phone in this price range, it's really not that much of a difference. So I feel like the 128 gigabyte variant makes the most sense because you're getting double the storage for only $50 more. Now if you went up to 256 gigabytes, you'd be paying around $550, I think, maybe a little bit more. So in that situation, maybe it's not really as worth it because most people can probably get by with 128. But again, I don't really think 64 is enough, especially for an iPhone, since again, there's no microSD card expansion here. Now with this phone, we are getting wireless charging, which is a great thing. I'm personally a big fan of that feature. I use it all the time myself. And if you already have a phone that does have wireless charging, I feel like it would be pretty hard to move to a phone that doesn't have it, especially if you already have a few wireless chargers. And in comparison to other phones in this price range, again, this phone is around $400, $450 in that general range, and there are very few phones in this price range that actually have wireless charging. If you want to stay in this price range and you really want wireless charging, you don't have a whole lot of options, so it's at least nice to see that this phone does have that feature. Now for security features, this phone does have a fingerprint scanner right here on the home button, which of course is another unique feature about this phone, being that it's basically an iPhone 8 with modern parts. It does have the classic iPhone home button, and I know a lot of people have missed this feature, so if you're one of those people, this is probably going to be a good thing for you. Now unfortunately, there's no face unlock with this phone. It seems like Apple just doesn't want to give us both, since normal iPhones only have face unlock, and this phone has a fingerprint scanner but no face unlock. Kind of funny how that works, but let's go ahead and give this fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive. I have no issues with this. Now for the camera setup, we got the front-facing camera right here on the bezel, and this camera is 7 megapixels. It's not really the best. There are some phones in this price range that are better, like for example the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. I'm pretty sure that phone does have a better front-facing camera. Even some of the older normal iPhones, like for example the iPhone 11 and even the iPhone XS Max that I was using for the longest time, that phone does have a much better front-facing camera than this, but still for just casual selfies, maybe Snapchat, something like that, it should be perfectly fine. Then on the back, we just got one single camera here, and this camera is 12 megapixels. Now don't let this outdated look fool you. This camera is actually really good, and if you want to take some high quality normal pictures, it'll definitely get the job done. The pictures look really good and professional, and despite not being quite at the level of a normal iPhone, I was pretty happy with the quality overall. In addition to this, the iPhone SE can shoot in 4K in the rear camera at 60 frames per second, only 1080p in the front, but still being able to shoot 4K videos at a higher frame rate is definitely a nice thing. So again, although this phone doesn't have a bunch of different camera features, if you want to take some high quality photos and videos, it will get the job done. Now internally, the iPhone SE is getting 4GB of RAM with the Apple A15 Bionic processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and as I'm sure you can imagine, we got some good numbers here, coming back with a single core score of 1729 and a multi-core score of 4619. Now you could run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current device and compare the scores to these to see if this phone would be an upgrade, but honestly, processing power wise, unless you have an iPhone 13 Pro Max, this phone is almost guaranteed to be an upgrade. So you're essentially getting one of the most powerful processors on the market in 2022, all in the body of this tiny old phone. Now what you're actually going to do with this processing power is a completely different story, because again, I honestly can't imagine doing a whole lot with this phone just because the display is so small. I wouldn't really want to play games on this phone, and consuming content and stuff like that is probably going to be a pretty mid experience honestly. But if you don't mind that, I know there are plenty of people out there who don't really mind having a smaller display, and if you are one of those people, or maybe you just want to do basic activities like web browsing, social media, and you just want your phone to be really fast, in that case it definitely does make sense, and if that is your situation, then this phone might be a really good option for you. In addition to this, in case you don't know, we are getting 5G connectivity with the iPhone SE, so that's another great thing about this phone. But in general, again, when it comes to processing power, that's probably this phone's biggest strength, because again, very few phones on the market at all, let alone in this price range, are going to be this fast. Now for the battery, this phone has a 2406 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging. So on paper, honestly, the battery really isn't very impressive. Yeah, the fast charging is good, so when the phone is dying, it will charge up pretty fast and save you some time. But again, the battery size isn't really the greatest. Sure, it is an improvement from the last iPhone SE, but that's really not saying much, seeing that most other phones in this price range are going to have somewhere around 4500, 5000 mAh batteries and support the same fast charging if not better. So while there are some impressive things about the iPhone SE, the battery is really not one of them. Now this phone also has NFC, which is probably not surprising considering it is an iPhone. So you can of course use Apple Pay, which I can tell you from experience, it's really convenient. Once you get used to using a feature like that, you're probably not going to want a phone without it. And while I want to say most phones around the $400, $500 range do have NFC, there's also an unfortunately surprising amount that don't. So all the same, I am glad to see that the iPhone SE does in fact have NFC. But now that we've gone over some of the phone's specs and features, let's take a closer look at the actual hardware. So on the left here, we got this knob that basically mutes the phone. I've been using iPhones for so long, I don't even know what to call this thing. Basically, if it's up, the sound is on, and if it's down, the sound is off. Pretty cool, and I haven't actually seen any other non-iPhone that has it. It's not really a game changer, but I still do like it all the same. Then we got the volume down, volume up. On the bottom, we got the microphone, a lightning port, and the speaker. On the right, we got the slot for the SIM card, power key, nothing up here on the top. On the front, we got the home button, and again, this is the fingerprint scanner as well. On the back, we got our one camera and our flash. The back has this glossy finish that surprisingly doesn't really pick up fingerprints that badly, and despite this just being the entry-level iPhone, the build quality is really good and the materials feel really premium. Now comparing this phone to its Samsung counterpart, which would probably be the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, which in case you're wondering, I am using to record this video, I would say the iPhone SE is definitely pretty impressive. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is a great phone, don't get me wrong, but the materials are not really that impressive at all. In fact, it pretty much feels exactly like a Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, whereas with the iPhone SE, it really does feel like a flagship phone, even though it's technically not. So despite many things I don't really like about this phone, I'm definitely happy with the materials. But in conclusion, Is the iPhone SE 2022 really worth buying in 2022? Now honestly, that really comes down to what you're looking for in a phone and how you're planning on using it. For most people, if you're going to be consuming a lot of content, but not exactly doing anything high-end that requires a lot of processing power, I feel like you can really do better. There are plenty of phones out there that are honestly a lot less expensive than this one. They have much better displays, ones that are not only larger, but have higher resolutions, better refresh rates, and just better colors and appearances overall. So if you're just going to be consuming content and doing more basic stuff, and you don't need the crazy processing power this phone has, again, I really think you can do better than this. But on the other hand, if you don't really mind having a smaller display, or maybe you're just not consuming a lot of content, or if you're doing more high-end activities that really need that processing power, then the iPhone SE might actually be one of the better options for you, because if processing power is really your number one priority, to the point where you don't really care so much about everything else, then for the money, you're probably not going to get anything more powerful than this. Another reason I could see getting this phone is if you want a new phone that was made in 2022, but you also don't need a whole lot of features, you just need the basics, but you also want to use iOS and not Android. I feel like that specific situation is what this phone is really meant for. People who want an iPhone, but don't exactly want to pay for a brand new iPhone 13 or a 13 Pro Max. And if you're one of those people, then the iPhone SE is absolutely worth buying in 2022. But again, if you're going to be consuming a lot of content and just on your phone a lot, and you want a 5G phone with a good amount of processing power, but you don't exactly need flagship level performance, then I do think you can definitely do better than the iPhone SE. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it gave you a better idea of whether or not this phone is actually worth buying for you. But that's it for this video. As always, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, but I will see you in the next one.